Hello and welcome to the Geographer's Craft. The Geographer's Craft is a class at the University of Texas at Austin in the Geography department, and this class explores a variety of qualitative and quantitative methods of analysis. For the first lab, we're going to be working with Microsoft Excel, and we're going to explore how we can use Microsoft Excel, which is a database management system, to manipulate latitude and longitude of a file that we downloaded off of the internet. Now, the file that we downloaded, for those of you in the course, can be found on Blackboard, and it shows you three different bits of information. The first piece of information that you're going to note is that you see what looks like a place name. I'll tell you right now that this is in Brazil, but that's not really important. What's important is that you have 3 bits of information, your latitude and your longitude. Now, each one of these bits of information is separated, in this case, by a comma. This is what we're going to call a comma-separated file, or a CSV. It's a delimited sort of file, so when we import this into Microsoft Excel, we'll want to note that it's delimited and not set to a standard width. So when you open up the file, it'll look similar to this. Now, this is just something you could type up in Microsoft Word or a plain notepad program. Now, in order to make this lab work, we're going to open up Microsoft Excel, and we're going to learn how to import this data as a text file. Now, usually when we open files in Microsoft Excel or Microsoft Word, we typically go to the File tab and just open a file. However, in this case, because it is a text file, we're going to go to the Data tab, and this is how we're going to manage most of our data. So from the Data tab, we're going to get external data from text. So what I'm going to be looking for is the file that I already downloaded from Blackboard, which is border points. I'm going to go ahead and import that. Note that it says as a text file. Now, remember that I just said there's 2 different kinds of files that you can download. There's fixed width, which assumes that each one of these characters, that 1-AR, is associated with another number. So each one is a place. There's also delimited, which is what we're working with. Now, that's when it's separated by a comma, a tab, or a pipe, which I'll show you next. So we're going to click on delimited, and we're going to go next. Note that I said earlier that these were all separated out by commas, so I'm going to deselect tab and hit comma. Now, as soon as I hit comma, because it is a comma-separated value, note that it puts in the rows or the column separators automatically. Now, if I were to change that and change it to space, it puts in a row separator every time there's a space. So I'm going to go ahead and change that back to comma and go next. Now, when you're importing data, perhaps step 3 is going to be the most important part. Note that at the very top of each column it says generate. Now, right now that signifies that it's any sort of numeric value will be converted to a number, date values will be converted to dates, and anything that's remaining will be just a general text file. Now, this isn't going to work for what we're doing today because we're going to want to separate out our degrees, our minutes, and our seconds from the latitude and longitude. So we're going to separate out the 10 degrees, we're going to separate out our minutes, which is 56 in this case, and then we're going to separate out our seconds. Now, the point is that this data is represented in the degrees, minutes, seconds format. However, for importation into ArcGIS, we're going to want to have that converted to decimal degrees. Now, often you find data on the internet that isn't in a compatible geographic coordinate system that you need to be working with, so you're going to need to learn how to convert these. So as I said, you're going to want to convert each file or each column from a general to a text column. The easiest way to do that is just highlight and click text. And be sure you do that 3 times so it's to your latitude and your longitude as well. So now this is each different bit of information. So then this whole latitude and longitude will be converted into text, meaning that each individual place, the negative, the 1, the 0, the decimal point, the 56, etc., is represented by a different place. So you can imagine that each one of those. So the negative will be 1, place 1, the 1 will be place 2, the 0 will be place 3, the decimal point will be place 4, the 5 will be place 5, and so forth. Once those are converted, we can go to finish, and click OK. And this will be the beginning of the data we're working with. The best thing to do next is to label all of your columns. You can do that at the very top. I'm going to label column A as place. I'm going to have my latitude, then I have my longitude. Now the remaining columns I'm going to separate out into my latitude, just the degrees, which will be 10, just the minutes, which is 56, and the seconds and fractions of seconds, which is going to be the 35 to 21. So I'm going to go ahead and label the rest of these columns as well. So lat degrees, lat minutes, lat seconds, and then I'm going to have this all reconstituted back together as just my latitude. And that's going to be in decimal degrees. I'm going to do the exact same headings for my longitude. It's going to be longitude degrees, longitude minutes, and longitude seconds. And then finally, we're going to put that all back together as our longitude degrees, decimal degrees. Now there's going to be one last column that we're going to add, and this is going to be our OID, or object identification. Essentially, this is going to be for ArcMap's internal housekeeping later on when we import these places into ArcMap. So, in order to separate out our degrees, our minutes, and our seconds, we're going to need to use a formula, and it's on your handout if you look at it. Equals value mid. Now the mid function that we're using in Microsoft Excel, it extracts a substring from a string, and now we can start at any position we want. Essentially what that means is we need to choose which column we're going to be using. So where it says mid text right here, that's going to be which column we're going to start with. So in this case, it's going to be B2. Now the next part of the function is which number do you want to start with? Now we want to extract the 10 so that we show just our degrees. And so that's going to be the negative is place 1 and the 1 for the 10 is in place 2. So our starting position is going to be place 2. And then the number of characters that we'll be taking from this string is 2. We're going to take the 1 and the 0. We're going to close that formula up, and we're going to get just 10. Now, in order to drag this down so you don't have to copy these formula hundreds of times, you can highlight your box and drag your crosshairs over the little square in the bottom right-hand corner and drag that all the way down to the bottom. It should give you all of your degrees. Now I'd just like to double check that our degrees in our column D matches up to the degrees in B2. We're going to use a similar function, the mid function, to extract our minutes, which is going to be 56. So if you're counting, that's going to be starting with place number 5. So mid is going to be, our start position will be B2 as well. We're starting with the 5th place, which is where the 5 is. Once again, we're going to take 2 places. Let's double check. Once again, the latitude minutes is up to 56, as well as our latitude in column B. Now, for column F, we're going to be working with our seconds and fractions of seconds. This becomes a little bit more complicated because 3521 in column B is going to be our seconds and fractions of seconds. In order to convert this into decimal degrees, we're going to want to convert those seconds and fractions of seconds into a decimal number. So our formula is going to be just a little bit, but essentially it's going to follow the exact same thing that we've been doing, but we're going to insert a decimal point in between the 35 and the 21. So equals value mid. Our string here is going to be fairly, where our starting place is once again B2. We're going to start, in this case, our 3 is going to be at place 7. We're going to take 2 digits. And then we're going to add a period. So essentially this is saying, and before you extract the 21, put a decimal place in between those two functions so that you have your seconds and fractions of seconds. And then it's going to be mid, same function, B2. We're going to start with our 9th place, and we're going to take 2. So that's going to take the 21. Now close that up. You can tell if it's closed up if you have the colors matching up on your parentheses. And then double check. Once again, I have the 3521. So now when we reconvert this into decimal degrees, what we're going to do is we're going to use these 3 separate bits of information, our degrees, our minutes, and our seconds, and we're going to reconstitute that into decimal degrees. So equals value. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take column D2, which is our degrees, so type in D2, that's 10. We're going to add column E2, which is our minutes. We're going to divide that by 60 because there are 60 minutes in a degree. And we're going to add to that column F2, which is going to be our seconds and fractions of seconds. And we're going to divide that by 3,600 because there are 3,600 seconds in a degree. And we're going to close that all up. Note that if I just hit enter now, it's going to give me a positive number. So that's going to be telling me that that's in a different hemisphere. So what we're working with is the southern hemisphere. So we're going to want to be sure that we make this a negative value. Now there's a couple of ways. One way to do that is to take the sign of the value. So I can type in here sign of the value of B2 is the column we're working with, and I can multiply that entire thing times my formula for decimal degrees. Now what that's saying is that take the absolute, whatever is in column B2, whether it's negative or positive, keep it negative or positive in column G. So note that I hit that and it becomes a negative number. Alternately, if you're only working with one hemisphere, you can just multiply everything times a -1. So we're going to have our formula there and multiply that times a -1. And that should also give us the negative number we're looking for. Now, if you look over at the latitude in B1 or B2 and compare it to G2, which is our formula for our decimal degrees, you have a slightly different number. Now, the reason for this is that decimal degrees and degrees, minutes, seconds vary slightly on how the actual location is displayed. However, it's going to be the exact same location. So when I'm done with that, I'm going to drag all of these down to the bottom to complete this. Just want to be sure that they all look kind of similar. So the degrees, minutes, and seconds should match up exactly from your column B2. And then your decimal degrees for your latitude should look fairly close. If it's way out of the ballpark, then you might want to go back and recheck and see what you could have done wrong. Also, note that there are in column B, or the record in B26 is -10.0000. Now, if you've imported that file and all you get is -10, you're going to get a lot of errors. That's because it's converting the -10.0000 to an actual numeric value. Now, one easy way to differentiate whether you're working with a text or a numeric value is looking at your different columns. If it's aligned to the left, such as right here, it's aligned to the left, then you're generally working with text. Now, contrary to that, if it's aligned to the right, like this, you're generally working with a numeric value. So keep that in mind. If you get a bunch of errors, you're going to have to re-import your data and be sure that you convert both your latitude and longitude from general to text. Now we're going to do the exact same thing for longitude, except the same formulas, except for we're going to extract it from a different column. So for our longitude decimal degrees, or longitude degrees, we're going to be extracting it from column C2. It's going to be 2. We're starting at the second place and taking 2 values. And once again, double check, 69 to 69. Our longitude minutes will be just almost exactly like the one like the latitude that we were working with earlier. So we're going to start in C2. We're going to take 5 and take 2 different digits. Once again, 31 matches up to our 31 minutes in C2. And then column J, so we are seconds and fractions of seconds. I think I have an extra parenthesis there. And it's going to be C2, 7.2. And we're going to insert a decimal place. just like that. And then C292. And this should give us our seconds and fractions of seconds. So 9.28. We're going to reconstitute that just like we did with the latitude. So equals the sine of the value, because we want to keep that negative. And it's going to be H2, which is our degrees, plus I2 divided by 60, 60 minutes in a degree, and then divide J2, which are our seconds and fractions of seconds, by 3600. Now, if I close that all up, it should give me the correct value. So my formula is not quite correct. I'm going to go back up here and change that. So it's the sine of the value of, forgot to insert my column that I'm working with. So I'm working with C2. I'm going to be sure to multiply all of that. So now that should give me a function that gives me my decimal degrees of my longitude. Now the very last thing that we're going to do is we're going to add that object identification number. As I said, that's just for ArcGIS's internal housekeeping. Now the best way to do that is to create a pattern. So I'm going to, in each different record, I'm going to type in 1, 2, 3. And holding the shift button, I'm going to highlight the first cell and the last cell. So they're all highlighted, and then go to that little box and drag it all the way down. And this is repeating that same pattern of increasing by 1 every time until the end of my files. So that is actually the complete lab that we'll be working with today. So just a little recap, most files that you find off the internet are stored in a format that takes up the least amount of room as possible. Generally, this is a text file, and we'll take a look at that text file again, where things are either separated out by a comma, a pipe, a semicolon, or a tab, or they're actually fixed width columns. This, in this case, is a CSV, or comma separated values. You can tell by the commas that are separating each of your different columns. We learned how to download that and then import that into Microsoft Excel. Remember, we're importing a text file from the Data tab, and we're going to get external data from text. That's how we're going to import text files. Now, then we'll choose whether it's separated by commas, or if it's separated by pipes or colons or semicolons, or if it's just a fixed width file. And we're going to convert everything into a text file so that nothing is converted to numeric. Once that's done, we can learn how to separate out using the mid function in Microsoft Excel our degrees, our minutes and seconds, and reconstitute that back into decimal degrees. Thanks for watching, and enjoy the geographer's craft